screenwriter, film maker, who is famous for a movie that you probably know, a well-known and appreciated movie as Dangerous Liaison, but also The Father, Carrington, Dangerous Method. I mean, I'm not going to quote them all. So as usual, tonight you will be free to ask him a question. Christopher Hampton came here to meet students. So here I have a list of questions that have been selected. So please be attentive and be ready when I call your name to stand up and ask your question as clearly as possible. Okay, so as the student just saw Dangerous Liaison, I thought maybe it could be our starting point before trying to build a more broader approach to your work. And what I thought is that maybe the student don't know that actually it's an adaptation from one of your stage play. And so it's in a way a kind of double adaptation. And the difficulty being, of course, that the novel is an epistolary novel where the character never meet. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about this process from the novel to the stage play and to the stage play from to the screenplay.
Well, I read the novel when I was, I think, 19 or something, and I thought it was the best novel I'd ever read. I thought it was extraordinary. And a little later, they were looking for plays. This was in the 70s, about 50 years ago. They were looking for plays at the new National Theatre. And they asked me if I would translate something by Marivaux. And I said, I think Marivaux is impossible to translate. But I would like to make a stage adaptation of Les Liaisons Dangereuses. None of them had read it, so after 6 weeks, they called me back and said, we don't think this is a good idea because the two main characters never meet. They never meet each other, they just write letters. And I said, well, I have a plan in which they would meet, so it would, don't worry. But they didn't want to do it. So it took about 8 years before the Royal Shakespeare Company asked me to write a play, any play, and I thought this is the moment for Les Liaisons Dangereuses. So I wrote it as a play. They were not happy with it, they didn't like it, but they put it on in their smallest theatre, and it was an enormous success. So it went from there to London to New York, and then we sold the film rights. We sold the film rights to a company called Lorimar because they were the only company who said that I could remain a producer and have some input into the casting and who directed it and so on. So that's the company that I chose. But they were in financial difficulties, one, and then two, Milos Forman suddenly announced that he was going to make a film of Les Liaisons Dangereuses. So it was a miracle that the film was made at all, really a miracle. And the only reason it was made was that there was a shareholders meeting of Lorimar at which the chairman said, I'm afraid the company is going bankrupt. And here we are making a film from an 18th century French novel no one has ever heard of. And at which the head of film from Lorimar, who was a wonderful man called Bernie Brillstein, said, well, if the company is going bankrupt, what the hell difference does it make? Let's make it anyway. If the company's going bankrupt, fine. What then happened was the company did go bankrupt during the first week of shooting, and by another miracle, Warner Brothers bought the whole thing and took it under their wing, and we were able to make the film very quickly. Stephen Frears had not directed this kind of film before, so they were very reluctant to have him, but they just wanted somebody who would do it quickly. And so we started to shoot at the end of May, beginning of June, and before Christmas the film was in the cinemas, a year before Milos got his film out. So that's how it happened. It shouldn't exist, but it does, which is great.
And what are the differences between the stage play and the screenplay?
I think that the theatre is very, very different from the cinema. And I think when you go and see a film which is adapted from a play, it often smells of the theatre, and it's not. It doesn't adapt very well. So you have to really change a lot of things as much as you possibly can. Not just a question of opening it out, having lots of scenes in different locations, but really try and reimagine the whole story in a visual way. So, in fact, the film is very, very different from the play, and the film is closer to the original novel. I took more liberties with the original stage play, and then I went back towards Laclos when I was writing the screenplay.
And could it be also some kind of strategy to first write a stage play, and when this stage play is popular, you have more chance to write a screenplay after, or it never happened like that?
It has happened like that. It happened like that with a Cronenberg film. My partner who's here, Tiana, said to me, I'd written the film. I'd written a film about Freud and Jung and Sabine Spielrein, and they didn't want to make it. And she said, "You spent all this time writing, researching. Why don't you write a stage play?" And so I wrote a stage play, and it was done in London with Ralph Fiennes. And about a year later, in fact, I think when I was editing this film in Los Angeles, I had a call from David Cronenberg, who said he'd picked up the play, which was published in a bookshop, and he'd read it, and he said, "Do you think it would make a film?" I said, "Well, it's funny you should say that, because it was a film." So I sent him the film, and then he wrote back and said, "Actually, the play is much better than the screenplay. Maybe we can start again and go from the screenplay." So that's what we did. And at the moment, I have a screenplay about Billy Wilder, the director Billy Wilder, and which I wrote a couple of years ago for Stephen Frears, and we're having trouble to raise the money. And so I'm thinking of, if we can't raise the money in the next 2 or 3 months, I'm thinking of doing the same thing, writing a play, hoping that the play will be noticed, successful, and if it is, then maybe it'll be easier to make the movie.
Okay. Regarding that subject, we have a question from Federico. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you a question regarding A Dangerous Method. For A Dangerous Method, you adapted not only the original book, but your own stage play as well. How did reworking the same story through several media affect your movie script? How does your method for writing dialogue change from one medium to the other?
I would say it doesn't, in the particular case of dialogue, I don't think it changes all the method of writing dialogue, but the way you set the dialogue is completely different in the theatre and in the and for a film, I think. As for the book from which Dangerous Method was taken, it's a history of the early years of psychoanalysis. So I just took this one story from the book. And in fact, I did my own research over a couple of years and discovered things that were not in the book. So the author of the book did not think that Jung and Sabine Spielrein had an affair. And I actually, I mean, it was some years that had passed since the book was written. But if you look at the correspondence of Jung had emerged at that point, and it was clear from the correspondence that they were lovers over a period of time, and that was you know, the controversial thing about their relationship, because I don't think, as far as I know, I don't think psychoanalysts are supposed to do that with their patients. So anyway, there was the added element of David Cronenberg, who is a sort of genius, I think. And I had one meeting with him in Toronto before I wrote the script. I then wrote the script. Oh, I said, do you have any advice? Do you have any advice for me before I start to write? He said, I like a script to be 83 pages. That was the only advice that he gave me. So 87 pages, I think he said. So I went back to London. I wrote a script. Unfortunately, it was 103 pages, but I sent it anyway. And then he invited me to Toronto. His notes were so clear that the meeting took about 40 minutes. And so I went back to London, and I knew exactly what he, you know, what was required. So the second draft took me about 2 days, and I sent it to him. And he said, thank you for doing this. I was wrong about this. Take this scene out, add this, you know, and gave me a very clear email. So the third draft took about 2 days. And then as a few weeks before the shooting began, he sent me an email saying, I don't want you to panic, don't panic. So of course you panic immediately. And what he said, I've just cut a few things. I've just cut a few things and see what you think. So I saw that it was 87 pages. So I read it, and I have to say, it was marvelous what he'd done. It was extraordinary. It was a lesson to any screenwriter as to how to make your script more economical and make the same points, but clarity. And so, however, I thought that the first 20 minutes of the film were too compressed. I thought she went from being extremely ill to being cured very, very quickly. And there were many more scenes in the screenplay about her gradual recovery. So I wrote to him about that, and I said there were two other things. So basically there are 3 areas that I'd like to look at again with you and consider putting some stuff back that you have cut. So about a week later I got an email. He said, I've considered your suggestions very, very carefully. No. So that was that. He shot the 87 pages. And his set is like a cathedral. Everybody knows exactly what they're doing. Everybody moves very quietly, and he always finishes. He's loved by producers because he finishes days early, even a week early. And in most days he finishes at 4 o'clock because he has such a precise idea of what he wants. He's also the only director I've ever worked with who sits in his trailer and watches on a big screen the lighting, so that he actually participates in the lighting, the cameraman's lighting, and makes suggestions, so that by the time he gets on the set, he knows exactly everything, and it's very quick. There's a big scene at the end of the film, which I wanted to watch being shot. So it was being shot over a weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I arrived on Friday afternoon. It was virtually finished. He'd shot it so efficiently, And the actors react very, very respectfully to in a way. Everybody knows their lines perfectly, and everybody knows exactly what they were supposed to do. And Michael Fassbender, who has an extraordinary constitution, was able to go out all night, come back at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then be on the set at 9 o'clock, and look terrific. Whereas Vincent Cassel, who used to go out with him, looked, as the tournage went on, he looked more and more wrecked, which was very good for his part, but he looked absolutely exhausted. But all of them were very, very, the whole thing was incredibly disciplined. And so it was a very, we came upon each other a little bit late, and we had a plan. We wanted to make a film about the rivalry between Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus. And we got a little way down the line, but we've never done it. And I guess now we won't, but it was a very interesting the subject to think about.
You mentioned your presence on the set as a screenwriter. I know that you have worked several times with Stephen Frears, with whom you wrote Mary Raleigh, Dangerous Liaison, Sherry, Billy Ryder, and Me. And I know that you appreciate the fact that on a Stephen Frears movie, you can be as a screenwriter on the set, which is not always the case. I think it was not the case for Atonement, for instance. Maybe it would be interesting for the student to know your perspective on that.
I think it's absolutely a matter of the director's preference, because the film belongs to the director, really, even though you've written it. And Stephen has this, from the time I first worked with him on television projects in the 70s in England, he always insists on having the writer on the set. And I can give you one example of why this is useful. Towards the end of Liaison Dangereuse, there's a scene where Michelle Pfeiffer is dying, and Uma Thurman and her mother, Susie Kurtz, come to visit her. And Stephen had designed a semicircular tracking shot which took the two women to where the bed was. So Michelle was on the bed and the camera arrived here. And so they rehearsed, and Stephen said to me, she's got to say something. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're coming around now, we arrive, she must say something. I said, well, what? He said, well, you're the writer. So he said, you've got 40 minutes. So I had to go and think and think and think. And now, when you see the film, the shot occurs, and the women arrive, and Michelle is lying in profile, and she says, I'm dying because I wouldn't believe you. I'm dying because I wouldn't believe you. So that was the line. I said, Stephen, he said, oh yeah, that'll do. So he has a fantastic nose for when scenes are working and when they're not working. And he'll say, I don't think the scene is quite working. And it's the thing he always says, so I said, well, in what way? I don't know, you're the writer. And he never explains, or he either won't or can't explain what it is he feels about the scene. But in my experience, he's nearly always right, that there's something you can do which will improve the scene. And he does that, he's able to do that because the writer is right there. With Joe Wright, who I think is a wonderful director, who directed Atonement, we worked very, very closely together. We finally went to Italy for 2 weeks and went line by line all the way through the film. And I had a very strong sensation the first time I went to the set that he wasn't very happy that I was there. He'd rather I wasn't there. So fine. He shot the film as we wrote it. He just didn't want me to be standing there. So that's okay too. And with Cronenberg, he was very happy, welcoming, happy for you to be there. And the film was shot in Germany and France and Vienna. And he was very happy for you to be there. But he wasn't going to change anything. He would, you know, you were not there to be consulted. You were there to watch what he was doing and say at the end of the day, well, that was good. That's all you have to do, which is a great pleasure, in fact, to watch him work. And so every director has their own what makes them comfortable.
But in your experience, when a director wants to change a line and the screenwriter is not there, what happens?
I'm afraid what happens is that they change it.
Yes.
And frequently...
For the better or the worse?
No, frequently not for the better.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Although I've just been watching a very interesting 5-hour documentary on Scorsese, and apparently they, you know, on their sets in those famous films, Raging Bull and so on, the improvisation level was enormous. So they would take a small scene and make it an enormous 5-minute take. Or they were, you know, they were very free with. They were used to working with each other, Scorsese, De Niro, Joe Pesci, and they regarded the script as a kind of blueprint that they could improvise on, like jazz musicians. So you know, there's no rules.
You're famous for your adaptations. I know that I think I know that you studied language. I think it was
Yes.
French and German also.
Yes.
You did a lot of translation in French from
Yes.
Yasmina Reza, theater play, Florian Zeller. Do you think that there is a link between your taste for translation and your ability to translate, so to speak, a novel into another medium?
I think that's right. I think it's all a different kind of translation. I mean, translating a text is one very specific thing. Translating a play into a film is another thing. Mm-hmm. Translating a film into a musical is another thing. It means that I guess, what you need to be able to do is to know the language of the film, the language of the musical, the language of the stage play, the language of the novel, and understand how to translate one into the other. Mm-hmm. So that's, and I like doing that. I mean, it interests me doing that, and so, in a way, although being a translator is a very underrated, underappreciated talent. I think good translators do an amazing job, but nevertheless, for me it's a very important aspect of what I do, and I think of myself a little bit as a writer who writes for actors, and I think of myself also as a translator.
I even heard that when you were working with Florian Zeller, he would send you a version in French, you would send him a version in English, and back and forth like this.
That's exactly what we did with The Father. Mm-hmm. I got Florian's first draft in French, but what is slightly different is that when I translated it into English, I changed things and sent them back in English. And we were going to make the film in English, so anyway, so I sent them back in English. Then he would send another draft to me in French. And then I sent a fourth draft in English. And then we spent really only about a week together in Paris and went through the script detail by detail and finished it together in the same room. But this method, which I'd never used before, I think it worked very well. And The Father was a particularly difficult property to take out of the theatre and put down in the cinema. And the way to do it, we decided, was not to open it out because it's a film about claustrophobia and about a man's head and what's happening inside a man's head. So we just devised means that we thought of as cinematic that were different from what happens in the stage play. Mm-hmm. And it's all quite subtle and often it had to, in the film what you can do is you can change a piece of furniture or repaint a wall a slightly different color and do things that the audience can't only half notices or doesn't quite notice, but that it's disorienting for the audience. So in nearly every scene of The Father, the furniture is slightly different, or the paintings are different, and it's all what's going on in his head.
Regarding the writing process of The Father, we have a question from Matthias.
You need
the mic, yes, thank you.
Here it comes.
So, good evening. Thank you to be here tonight. You work with Florian Zeller to adapt his play, The Father, for the cinema. I'd like to know how did you come to work together at the beginning? And you said earlier that we have to change a lot of things about when we adapt a play. So how much freedom did he give you to adapt his play?
Well, first of all, I had seen a play, a comedy of Florian's called Avec, which I later on translated and which we've done in London. We're going to do it again next year. But I didn't know exactly what kind of a writer he was. I just liked the play very much. And when I went back to London, I tried to interest certain producers in putting the play on in English, but I couldn't get anyone. And then the following year, an English producer called me and said that Florian is, you should go and see that because I hear it's very good. So I came to Paris, and I went to see the play, which is an extraordinary chef-d'oeuvre, I think. And then I had dinner with him afterwards and said, if you'll allow me, I would like to translate this play. Now it's very, I started off by translating plays by a lot of dead people, and they give you no trouble. Then the first person who was still alive was Yasmina Reza that I translated. And I think, and then I saw it was a completely different game. And she's very, very, not quarrelsome, but she's very argumentative about all sorts of things. So it's a real process with her, days and days of negotiation. With Florian, he read the translation that I'd done, and he said, fine, that's good, let's go ahead. That's all. We didn't change anything, really. Maybe one or two things during rehearsals, but then the problem with The Father was it was very difficult to get a production in England, even though it had been commissioned by a producer. All the theatre managers the play was taken to said, oh God, this is so depressing, no one wants to see this sort of thing. And eventually we had to open it in a 100-seat small theatre in Bath. And immediately it was a great success. So it went then to a sort of off-Broadway London theatre, and then finally into the West End, and then finally to Broadway. So it was a big success. And then I'd known for some time that Florian was interested in making films. But I thought the rights had already been sold, I think, to Jean-Louis Lévy, and they had made a film called Floride, which was set in America with Jean Rochefort, and so it was done. The film was done. But Florian said to Philippe Gagazan and Jean-Louis Lévy, "Will you let me do my own? Do it again? Will you let me do it?" And remarkably, they said yes. And so then we entered into this process of long discussions about how to change it from a stage play to a film. And the answer, as I said earlier, the answer was not to make big changes, but somehow to look at the each moment of each scene to make sure that it was working cinematically, which is a difficult thing to define, but it's something that you feel. And then he also wanted me to be on the set, because he'd never made a film before. I'd only directed 3 films, but he had never directed any films. And so I was on the set, not all the time, but for the first week. It was clear within one day that he knew exactly what he was doing and he was fine. It was, so I didn't need to be there. But he liked me to be. He liked me to be there. He checked with me. You know, did I think we needed another take, or did I think it was the scene was right, or the setups were right? And they nearly always. I mean, I almost always said yes. I think your choices are very good. So I was just really kind of a security blanket, I think, for him. He really did know what he was doing. And now he's about to. I don't know whether he's started shooting yet, or he's about to start shooting. Oh no, he's written an original screenplay.
Yes.
Called Bunker, I think, which he's doing with Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz and Stephen Graham, and it's either about to start shooting or it has already started. I think it's not started yet, but that's a completely original film which he's done himself, and I think will be half in Spanish and half in English. And I haven't read it, but I imagine it'll be very good.
Being often at the very start of the project, of a project, you maybe know more than anyone in the film industry how much time it takes and how much perseverance it takes to finance a movie and to make it happen. Maybe it will be also interesting for the student if you could share your experience.
Well, to take the example of Imagining Argentina, Dangerous Liaison came out, it was very successful, and I won the Oscar. And I thought, okay, now I can do a project, a difficult project that I want to do. And so I found this novel, Imagining Argentina, by an American writer, first novel, and I took it to Sony, I think it was, Columbia, and they commissioned a screenplay. And I had a very clear idea in my mind of what the film would look like. And the first draft I wrote was only 52 pages, because I thought it was going to be, you know, as it is, a film with a lot of traveling shots and, you know, moments of silence, and I thought the 52 pages was enough. And they said, well, we like the script very much, but we're not going to pay you, because you will notice in your contract that it can't be under 80 pages or something. So I wrote another script, which was like 106 pages. But then they decided they didn't want to do it. And gradually, in the ensuing, it took 14 years to raise the money. And in the end, we had 11 producers, none of whom agreed with one another. The screenplay had gone quite a lot back towards the original concept and away from. But the thing that I did keep in the novel, she disappears at the beginning, and then she comes back at the end, but you don't know what happens to her in between. So I thought it would be more interesting to have a large part for an actress, and so I invented all that stuff about her, and in order to I think it was the right thing to do in terms of, and of course it enabled us to work with Emma Thompson, which was great. And in fact, one or two scenes in the film that Emma Thompson wrote. As you may know, she's a very good writer. She has an Oscar for Sense and Sensibility, you know, we were talking about one or two of the scenes, and I said to her, "Well, why don't you write them?" And so she wrote versions of some of the scenes, and sometimes we took her version, and sometimes we took my version, but always in agreement. She always said, "Oh no, yours is better," and I would say, "Oh no, yours is better." And so it was a very fruitful collaboration in that way. But the film did take 14 years. Carrington took 18 years. And the film that I hope will go first next year for my script is a script I wrote in 2007. That's 18 years ago. And it's a film based on a Hungarian novel called Embers, which is going to be directed by István Szabó, the great Hungarian director. So that starts in the spring next year. But again, it was a very, very long wait. So you have to be patient and you have to live a long time in order to get your films made.
In terms of ratio, how many of your screenplay have been shot?
So far I had 19 films made, but I have written 58 scripts or 60 scripts, something like that.
Which is a good ratio.
One in three is a good ratio, but of course, this is a thing that screenwriters have to understand right at the beginning, and I think it's less of a problem in France actually than in the English-speaking world. But a lot of the work you do will be invisible. There are thousands and thousands of invisible movies that have not been made, and you know it's difficult sometimes. You have to say to yourself, well, I know. Sometimes you think a script that you've written is better than another script that you've written that has been made, but somehow nobody's understood that this one is the good one, and it doesn't get made. So it's frustrating. But on the other hand, when you do write a script that does get made well by a good director, then it's incredibly satisfying.
Regarding the Oscar, we have a question from Lucy. You see there, yeah. You can stand up.
Hi, thank you for being here. Yes, so I had a question about your liberty as an artist, because as we all know, you have been rewarded several times for your adaptations on screenplay. And I would like to know, how do you manage to reconcile your liberty as a writer, as an artist, with the urge of, let's say, protect the original
I see.
piece?
No, because I thought you meant what happens when you disagree with the studios.
No, not that. Just with the original writers of, the piece that you adapt.
I have quite a good record with original writers, and in other words, I like to ask them what they think and listen to what they think. And most of them understand that a film is very different from a novel. And for example, Lawrence Thornton, who wrote this Imagining Argentina, he absolutely loved the film, although it's quite a long way away from, in some respects, to his novel, as I just explained. And with the Billy Wilder film, that's adapted from a novel which, only some of which, but maybe half of it, is about Billy Wilder, and the rest is about other things that I wasn't interested in. So I said to the writer, am I allowed to just write about Billy Wilder and leave the rest out? And he said, yeah, do what you like. So I've been lucky because I haven't had any disputes with any of the people whose novels or plays I have adapted. And indeed, for me, the most satisfying thing of all was when I decided to do a musical of Sunset Boulevard. And I wrote to Billy Wilder and said, is this all right? Because I knew him. I think it would make a very good musical. Will you sell us the rights? To which I got a letter back immediately from Billy Wilder saying, you're a writer, you must understand I have no rights. You must apply to Paramount. But then when it all went forward, he was very, very interested, and he came to rehearsals in London, and he came to the premiere in London, he came to the premiere in Los Angeles, and when he was interviewed by some newspaper, said, what do you think of the adaptation of the of your script into a musical? He said, well, the boys were very clever, they didn't change much. So he was happy.
Okay.
But it is a delicate thing.
I guess it takes some confidence between
I
the
did.
two
Well, I
parts.
did write actually. When I was young, I wrote a play based on a novel by George Steiner called "The Portage to San Cristobal of A.H.," which is about the premise was that Hitler had survived to be 90 in South America, and I wrote the play, and he wasn't happy with it, and so afterwards it's only been done that it was pretty successful, but I didn't do what I think he had in mind, so it's now not allowed to be done. Nobody can do it now because he's dead, but he left instructions.
Okay.
For God's sake, don't let him do that play. So sometimes it goes wrong, obviously, but mostly it's an extra good element.
Thank you very much.
There has been hundreds or thousands of books written or all to good, a good script, a successful script, since I think even the beginning of the 19th century. But what I think is interesting, telling all sort of rules, narrative arc, triggering element. But from what I understood, you don't really believe in those rules.
I don't believe in those rules at all, really.
I think it could be interesting maybe for the student.
I don't really. There's Robert McKee, all those things, the Joseph Campbell, all that stuff. I don't believe in any of it, because I think that really interesting films are not written to a formula. They're not formulaic. I mean, one of the problems with Imagining Argentina, which had a lot of trouble after I'd finished it with the 11 producers, was that they couldn't fit it into any. And I remember going to a screening in some terrible place I think it was called Ontario, California, and it's in the middle of the desert, and it's a big multiplex, and they demanded that all the audience should be under 25, and the film started, and it actually went, to their surprise, it went pretty well, I think. But I was standing with one of the producers at the back of the hall, and after the questions from the main audience, there's a focus group of 12 people from the audience who discuss what they really think about the film. And there's a moderator who started off this conversation by saying, when you think of this film, what is the first word that comes into your head? And one of the focus groups said, original. And the executive standing next to me went, oh, oh. So he was very upset that the audience thought it was original. And they don't, it's uncomfortable. Things that are, and I think, you have to, if you want to create what for better or worse you might call a work of art, you have to be able to risk that it's ugly, and that it upsets people, and that it is original. And I think that's what attracted me to this project in the first place, apart from the fact that I was very interested in what had happened in Argentina. What attracted me to this was it seemed a very original a version of events. And what I liked about it and why I wanted to make a film of it was that despite the terrible events that happen all the way through, it is actually an optimistic piece of work, because it says, quite straightforwardly, it says that, that in repressive regimes, terrible dictatorships, cruel political situations, what all those people who are doing those things, the politicians, the army, or whoever it is, they lack one thing, and the thing that they lack is imagination. And eventually they will fall, because you have to have imagination. You have to keep flexible. You have to be imaginative, or you simply can't keep on repressing everybody. And eventually, sooner or later, imagination will prevail against fascism. That's what I think the book says, and that's what I was hoping to say with the film.
But does it happen, for instance, when you present a screenplay to a producer or to a director, that they tell you, well, I don't know, the character is not sympathetic enough, the audience will not identify with him, there is the antagonist is not strong enough, there is I don't know, no triggering element.
Yeah. All those things. The thing
How
about
do you react?
well, the thing about people being not sympathetic enough, it depends on the actor, it depends on the circumstances, it depends on, and it doesn't matter whether the hero is sympathetic or not. There are very interesting stories in which the hero is not sympathetic, so it doesn't make any difference. But you do have to sort of, I mean, basically the intelligent thing to do is to say, how interesting, yes, I see what you're saying, yes, and then do exactly what you want to do. But I tend to, I have been fired a lot, and what happens in Hollywood is they don't tell you you're fired. You simply hear, you know, one day that somebody else is doing the film.
Sorry.
Or but I'm pleased to say that hardly any of the films from which I was fired ever actually got made, and those that did, one or two that did, were not successful. So you have to stick to your convictions, I think, and it's no good trying to accommodate and say, oh yes, that's, and change things. Don't change things. If it comes from your, you wanted to write this for a certain reason. You may not know quite what that reason is, but it's a compelling reason that makes you want to write it. And you have to be faithful to that. You can't be faithful to the people who think the character is not sympathetic enough. One of the scripts that I wrote, which was never made, there's a famous novel by Donna Tartt called The Secret History. And I was hired to write that in the screenplay of that in the 90s by Warner Brothers. And I did. And I was working with Alan Pakula, the great American director, but various things happened. The first thing that happened was that the people in the studio said, well, the character is too passive. And I said, well, if you read the book, that is the subject of the book. The subject of the book is that there's this boy who's passive, who is attracted by these people he thinks are very interesting and clever and attractive and so on, but they're evil. But he lets himself be influenced by them. Now, that requires somebody who's passive, okay? Oh yeah, but we can't really offer it to an actor. An actor will, the actors we're interested in will all say, this is too passive, I have to be much more active in the film. So we were sort of churning through all this nonsense when Alan Pakula died in a car crash. So the whole thing was obviously suspended for a while. And then when they returned to it and they got back in touch with me again talking about how passive the hero was, it was discovered that their option had expired, and Donna Tartt refused to renew it. She understood what was going on with this. She talked to one or two people in the studio as well, and so the film was never. It should be. Somebody should make it. It's a great story, and it's sold 10 million copies or something. It's one of the best-selling novels of the 90s, and it foundered because I think because of basic misunderstanding from studio executives who bought a novel which was very successful, didn't understand why it was successful. The people who read the novel, they don't care whether the hero is passive or active. They just want a good story, and the good story requires that the hero is passive. I rest my case.
If you don't have, if you don't obey the rules, maybe you have a habit or technique in the writing process. And we have a question from Thomas.
So, do you have any writing rituals? And if so, do they help you to overcome the difficulties you encounter in your movies?
I think the best help, the best assistance for a writer is something called a deadline. As it comes closer and closer and closer, somehow your mind becomes concentrated and you write faster and faster and faster. No, I think the thing is this, I do have an unusual, I guess, an unusual method of approaching a screenplay. Which is that I make notes and I think about it for quite a long time. I mean, probably twice as long as it takes me to actually write it. I'm thinking about it. And by the time I come to write it, I have a pretty clear idea. It's not rigid because I allow changes to occur while I'm writing it, but I have a pretty good idea of what I'm writing. And then I like to write it really quite fast. That's quite difficult when you starting a screenplay is a slow process because you make false starts, and eventually, however, when you get started and it seems to be working, and you get to be maybe sort of 2/3 the way through. In my case, suddenly I see the light at the end, and I can write the rest of the film in a few days. Having maybe taken 6 months or 8 months to prepare it, I write very fast. And my superstition is that the energy that requires from the writer, it translates into energy on the screen. Or, it's probably nonsense, but that's what I feel. And so it's a difficulty because. The people who hire you to write scripts always say, how's it going? How are you doing? And generally what I say is, well, I haven't started. And they get completely freaked out by the fact that, oh, but you've been, it's 4 months, And I say, no, I'm planning it. Don't worry, it'll be approximately on time. And usually it is. It's a mysterious process, but there's a moment in the writing of it when suddenly you think, that's it, I know what to do, and you start running.
How did you came up with that technique from the very start of your career, or while writing a specific screenplay?
I think I'm nervous of giving rules about writing screenplays because I think everybody has to find their own rhythm. And this eventually, I think when I wrote my first screenplay, I didn't understand I'd never read a screenplay. I don't think. I wrote the first screenplay, which was based on my first stage play, and I didn't know how to change it or what to do or anything, and it was completely terrible. And they didn't make it, and that's very good that they didn't make it because it was like a stage play moved a little bit to the side, and it wasn't good because I hadn't really worked out how to write a play. But I had a series of very lucky experiences. I did 2 big sessions with 2 great directors. I worked for 9 months with Fred Zinnemann, who was Austrian emigre like Billy Wilder, who had great success in Hollywood with films like High Noon and Oklahoma and so on. And so I wrote a film for him, and he really taught, and I went into the office every day and worked with him, and he really taught me about narrative. He wasn't interested in anything except the juggernaut, the autobus of narrative. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Inevitably, you have to find the right way to go forward. And he would look at a scene, he would say, "What's this?" I would say, "Well, it's a joke." And he would say, "Well, no, we don't want that. We want to go forwards." So he wasn't a man who was interested in distraction. In fact, I went once with him to see the marvelous film by Terrence Malick called Days of Heaven. And I went with him to the cinema to see it. And at the end of it, he looked very angry. And I said, "Didn't you like it?" He said, "No, I didn't like it at all." I said, "But it's such a beautiful film." And he said, it was so beautiful, I couldn't concentrate on what was going on. I couldn't concentrate on the story. I couldn't understand the story. So I worked with him, and the film was cancelled by the head of 20th Century Fox while we were in pre-production in Austria. So but it was a very good experience for me. And then the second person I worked with was David Lean, for whom I wrote an adaptation of a Joseph Conrad novel called Nostromo. And I was with him for a year, and he really taught me, I think, how to write a screenplay. And that was my good luck. And so it was no coincidence that the Nostromo was never made either, because David Lean got ill and died, having cast it and getting ready to shoot. He died, but it's no coincidence that the screenplay that I wrote immediately after working with David Lean was Dangerous Liaison, because I had somehow learned in those 2 long years with those 2 masters, really, a lot of things about screenwriting, which I couldn't, I hadn't been able to teach myself.
In case the students don't know, David Lean is the director of Lawrence of Arabia, Ryan's daughter, Dr. Girago. The one Brief Encounter, exactly. Regarding the writing process, we have also a question from Ivan. Ivan?
Hello, thank you for your time. What are the different problems you may encounter when writing a screenplay?
What are the kinds of problems?
Yes.
I think that, unfortunately, the kinds of problems you encounter are the kinds of problems you encounter after you finish the screenplay. I mean, obviously, there are difficulties in writing a screenplay, and there are blocks, and there are things that have to be solved, and there are problems and so on, but you're with yourself, you're doing that. Once you finish the screenplay, that's when the real problems start. Because people have their own ideas, and they say, "Oh, wouldn't it be better if you did this?" or "Why don't you do that?" And you don't want to do that. So it's very, and I just want to talk a little bit about what happened with Imagining Argentina, for example, because when I'd finished the film, which we all, despite the kind of miserable subject matter, we all felt, we were all very happy making the film, and we felt good making the film. Then I had edited with my editor, George Akers, who I always work with, and we presented the film to them, and then all hell broke loose. And they said, and they wanted changes of all kinds, and one of the most amusing changes is one of the producers called, I think, Philipp von Alfersleben, and I never met him. He was, I don't know, German money or something, and one of we had all these note sessions with all these producers, and one day they said, "We don't like the fact that the film starts with the arrest of Emma Thompson right at the beginning, we think there should be a credit sequence. Because I had decided I wanted to put the credit sequence at the end. So they said, we think there should be a credit sequence. And I said, I don't have the money for it. So they gave me $50,000 to make a credit sequence with a Chinese guy who's specialized in credit sequences in Hollywood. And it was very, very good. I mean, what he did was extremely good. And I said, I would like to know why Miss Herr von Alfersleben is so interested in having a credit title. And he said, oh, well, his mother goes to see his films, and she likes to see his name at the beginning. And I said, well, well, you should, it's the same. What's the difference? It's the same thing. His name comes at the end. And they said, well, this is not the kind of film that Philipp von Alfersleben's mother would like. And so therefore we have to have his name at the beginning, then she can go home. So $50,000 for a credit sequence. Now, they all, eventually I made a rule, which was that there could only be one producer in the editing room at the same time, at any time. Never two, because they always wound up arguing with one another. And so that was the solution to my problem. By this time, they had fired my editor and hired not the I said, okay, if you're going to fire my editor, I'm going to take the editor of Lawrence of Arabia, Anne Coates, who'd seen the film and liked it very much. And they telephoned Anne Coates, the editor, and said, if there was a dispute between the producer and the director, which side would you take? She said, well, I work for the director. I always work for the director. They said, thank you very much, goodbye. And so I was working with an editor called Claire Simpson, very good editor, who had just won the Oscar for editing Platoon by Oliver Stone. And I went into the editing room in Los Angeles, and she showed me her edit. And then I remembered a famous ploy of Stephen Frears's, which he told me about one day. And I said, well, okay, good. If that's the film you want to release, can you get me a car to the airport? This is very, very good. And they were a bit baffled. I said, look, this is not my film. Fine, take my name off it, send me home. Good. And that was the starting point of months of every day fighting for this, fighting for that, fighting for the other. And eventually Claire Simpson came around to my way of thinking. And eventually, after all this weeks and weeks and weeks of re-editing, we arrived pretty much at the first draft, pretty much what we had at the beginning. But by that time, all the producers were so exhausted, they thought they'd made a lot of changes, but they hadn't. There are one or two things in the film that I'm very unhappy about, which were imposed. I didn't put on the end all that thing about, all those statistics about, all the other countries who were disappearing people. That was put on by the studio. I had, at the end, I just wanted the Casa Rosada, the presidential palace, to be in the frame, and just to put nunca más, which means never again, on the screen. That's what I did, and they wouldn't let me do that. It was exhausting. The whole process was completely debilitating. But that's what that's, you have to be. That's really, I guess, why I haven't directed films very often, because it's hard to deal with all of that sort of thing. At the end of it, Claire Simpson said to me that I was even more stubborn than Oliver Stone, which I took to be a compliment.
Ivan, I think you have a second question.
Yes.
Who do you think we should talk to about your writing project in order to get advice and relevant opinions?
if I can add something, do you have friends with whom you
Do
share,
I-
or do you co-write sometime with?
Sometimes, well, I've only ever really co-written with Florian. So that was and in the theatre I've also co-written with for the musicals that I've done. I have a co-writer. So and it's very nice to work with someone else. But mostly I work by myself. And yes, there are some people that I like to read, and I listen to what they have to say. But I don't take advice along the way, and I don't seek advice along the way. I don't ask people their opinions while I'm doing it. I do it, and then sometimes there are some obvious things that friends point out, or they say, "Why don't you try this?" or "Why don't you try that?" And I'm very open. I don't mind all the way down until we're on the set, and even then, I don't mind considering changing things. But I have to be convinced that there's a good reason. Because most of the time, because there are two different kinds of film, broadly speaking. One is the independent films, where, by and large, you have freedom, you do what you want to do. Then there's the studio picture, American usually, where there's a very rigid set of, and then you have to go in fighting. You have to really stand up for your point of view. I mean, Mary Riley, which is a film I did with Stephen Frears, which is a horror film with Julia Roberts and John Malkovich, had a year's fighting between Stephen and the studio, and again, it was eventually released more or less as he wanted it to be released in the first place. But he has conceived himself a horror of the film. He hates the film. He doesn't ever want to see it again. The whole experience was so distressing. He doesn't really want to deal with it ever again. And there was a very funny thing that happened, because at the Berlin Film Festival, when it reached its 60th anniversary, they chose 6 films to represent, one for each decade of and for the 90s they chose Mary Riley, and so they brought Stephen to Berlin, and there was a conversation like this, and the moderator said, well, you know, and Stephen kept saying, no, the film is terrible. You don't understand, this is a terrible film. Why have you chosen it? I don't understand. Who likes this film? So anyway.
There's all an industry today of film lab, writing lab, pitching firm, where 100 people are telling you what you should, or you should write your script. I think it must be a nightmare for you. You never attended, I imagine.
No, well, they didn't exist actually when I was young, and I do think it's. Yeah, I do think we talked about this earlier on, but the prescribing of rules is not what you. Is not what you. As I said, my first screenplay, I didn't know what I was doing, it was terrible. And then I was hired to write another screenplay, and I thought I really must try and find out something. So I bought 5 novels that Harold Pinter had adapted for the screen, and then I wrote. I got hold of the 5 screenplays. And I read each novel, and I read the screenplay that Harold Pinter had made from it. And then I began to see what he was doing and why he was doing it. And I learned a very good lesson that if you're adapting a masterpiece, you should stay close to that masterpiece, because it's a masterpiece for a good reason. If the novel is not so good, for example, Pinter did a screenplay based on a spy novel called The Quiller Memorandum, and he just had fun with it. The result was not very much like the novel. So he instinctively, obviously, worked out that, you know, stay with the good stuff, be faithful to it. The less good stuff, you can you know, do what you like.
Speaking about a great screenwriter and stage play writer, I think Federico had a question about Tennessee Williams.
Ah, yes.
Yes, in an interview you mentioned that.
Wait for the mic, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
In an interview, it's not switched on. There you go.
Yeah.
In an interview, you mentioned that Tennessee Williams is your favorite American writer. Why? And among his plays, which one would you recommend? I'm sorry. Which one would you recommend to aspiring?
Which one would I recommend to aspiring?
To aspiring screenwriters, and why?
Well, it's very interesting you should ask that. First, the question was, why do I think
Yeah, why do you
Tennessee Williams? I think that sort of combination of lyricism and extreme drama, and I just think he was a great poet of the theatre. And of course, I love Streetcar Named Desire, but there are many of his. I think my favourite play of his is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I met him once. I was very lucky to have dinner with him in the last year of his life. And we talked, what we talked about the whole evening at dinner was the films that had been made from his plays. And sadly, he didn't like any of them. He didn't like any of them. He kept saying, oh no, I didn't care for that one. And mostly it was to do with the fact that they had been subtly censored. Each of his plays had been censored. Some of them strongly censored, like Sweet Bird of Youth, which ends in the theatre with the castration of the main character. In the film, they just break his nose. And he just didn't like it. I said, what about Streetcar Named Desire? Oh, no, I didn't really care for that. And he wasn't very clear about why he didn't like them, except that it was obvious that he felt that some essence in the plays, which had to do with something uncompromising and powerful, and of course that had been removed by the filmmakers. Of course, he personally, the American critics, theatre critics, are very, very destructive. And he personally his life had been destroyed. His work had been destroyed by American critics, but specifically the critic of the New York Times. Because every time he wrote a new play, they would attack it, and it only needed one bad review in the New York Times and your play closed immediately. And so, year after year, he lost confidence in his work. And towards the end of his life, other people told me this, he precisely because his confidence had been destroyed, he would rewrite and change things, and at the minute that anybody said, oh, I don't think he would go away and rewrite the whole thing over again. And so he was an example of someone who was somehow attacked and destroyed by negative criticism of his work. Of course, he was incredibly successful. Of course, he wrote some classics that will last forever, but he was resilient, because he was kind of. I said, how are you now? And he said, well, I'm keeping going. And he said, I keep thinking maybe next year I'll write a great play. And this was a very moving moment for me. And it was an unforgettable evening that I spent with him. But the center of the evening was his disapproval of all the, and I think some of those films are very good. I think Fugitive Kind by Sidney Lumet. I think some of them are very good. I like Suddenly Last Summer, Joe Mankiewicz's film of Suddenly Last Summer. But
No, okay. I was wondering, what do you think nourish your imagination? I know you travel a lot. I imagine you read a lot. Are you the kind who reads the newspaper a lot? Sometimes teachers are recommending to students to attend trials. Are you standing in coffee, listening to conversation?
all those things are useful, I think. But I can't account for the fact that by the age of about 8, all I wanted to do was be a writer. And this was very strange because my parents were very athletic, and so was my brother. And they were out playing tennis the whole time. And I was kind of reading a book, I started writing plays when I was 8. And I have no explanation for it whatsoever. So who knows why. But that's all I ever wanted to do. And luckily, it's all I ever have done. I've been able to be a writer all my life. So yeah, I think maybe what was useful was I was born in the Azores, Portuguese Azores, and then I was brought up in Egypt until I was 10, and then all the British were thrown out of Egypt because of the Suez Crisis, the sort of war that happened, and I had the experience of being unpopular in Egypt because I was British and the British were becoming the enemy. So I had a little bit of that. But then worse, when I came back to England and I repeated what my father had said, which was that it was a very stupid war in which the British had behaved very, very badly, I got into much worse trouble and I was told to go and see the headmaster, who said, you know, we have soldiers dying in Egypt. You can't say things like this. You shut up. And I was 10. So it was a very interesting political education, being attacked by both sides at the same time. And of course, one of the definitions of writing drama is the ability to write opposite points of view with equal conviction, to agree with both sides, to see what each side has, and then a conflict ensues, which makes for interesting drama. So I guess that kind of outsider upbringing was useful.
I think we have a question from Louise.
Hi. How did you develop the desire to write, and more broadly your passion for literature and theater? And what are your main source of inspiration, whether literary, thematic, or personal?
Well, these are great mysteries. The answer is I don't really know what I'm looking for until I find it. And when I found it, I don't know really why I'm so interested in it. I think one of the great sort of learning experiences I had was to read À la recherche du temps perdu when I was young, when I was a student. And you go through, that's 3,000 pages or whatever it is, of an incredibly intellectually dense novel. And at the end of it, Proust tells you that the instinct is much more important than the intellect. And so it's great if you're clever, but it's not going to cause you to write good stuff. What you have to trust is something intangible, an instinct, which says, go this way. Well, it's not particularly logical. Never mind, go this way. So I guess I listen to that voice, and when we're talking about things that I might want to adapt, I don't understand. I read Atonement when it first came out, and I went straight to my agent and said, I want to do a film of this. I don't know why particularly. It just moved me in a certain way, and my instinct said, trust this book. And so I like to do completely different things all the time. And I remember when I was young, when I started out, that there were lots of writers, theatre writers that I admired very much, whose careers were quite short because they would write the same play, like a painter doing the same subject over and over again. They would write the same play over and over again. And every time they wrote it, it got a little bit less interesting. And then at the end, they were dry. And so, fortunately or unfortunately, I wasn't particularly interested in writing from my own life. I was interested in finding how many different things I could get passionate about, and how many different directions I could go in. And that, I guess, is quite long. I mean, my first play was performed about 60 years ago. So it's been quite a long career. And I feel that I've been able to keep going because I don't know what it is I want to do. And maybe I'm looking for what I really want to do, and I don't know. And maybe that's a good thing.
As you just said, your stage play, your screenwrites, your screenplays are very different. But do you feel there is something in common? Can you see a thread?
Yes. I think I always knew that I was interested in artists, and so, for example, the second play that I wrote was about Rimbaud and Verlaine, which eventually, 25 years later, was made into a movie by Agnieszka Holland. Yes, and I was very interested in. I think when I wrote the play, I wasn't quite sure about what it meant to be a writer, and the play is about somebody trying to find out by taking two completely different kinds of writers who had completely opposite ideas to try and find out what you could expect if you wanted to spend your life being a writer, what was to be expected, and what issues were to be thought through. But I've found recently that I've written a lot of screenplays about artists. Apart from Billy Wilder and Shostakovich, and I've written a screenplay about Simone de Beauvoir, and I'm particularly interested in the what makes these artists.
Do you know why?
No, possibly because I don't know why, and I'm also I'm interested in emotional relationships. I'm interested in the difference between sex and love, which is really what Carrington is about. There are certain themes that I now understand keep coming back. But in the main, I try and keep us as many, moving in as many different directions as possible. I think a moving target is obviously more difficult to hit.
I think, Louise, you had a second question.
Throughout your career, is there a project you are particularly proud of? And conversely, is there another that perhaps left you with a feeling of incompleteness? Yeah. And why?
Let's see now. I think all in all, probably because it took so long, 18 years to make, and probably because it was my first film as a director, I think Carrington is the film the thing that I'm most proud of, because it's a very difficult subject, and it took an awful long time a huge number of drafts, and then I was quite happy with the result, and it as I say, it was my first experience as a movie director. And so that was very right in the middle of my life. I guess it's more difficult to pick things. There are films that have not done what one expected them to do. Not so long ago, about 10 years ago, I wrote a film called Ali and Nino, which is based on a famous Azerbaijani novel, a kind of Romeo and Juliet story about a Christian girl and an Orthodox girl and a Muslim boy around the time of the early part of the towards the end of the First World War in the Caucasus, and I thought the novel was very, very beautiful, and and I took a long time over it. And when we shot it, I was there in Azerbaijan for most of the shooting, and I somehow, when I saw the film, I realized I somehow had failed to get the essence of the romanticism of the novel, and there was a lot of nervousness about, because there was a lot of I suppose criticism of Muslim practices of one kind or another, and people were very nervous about that in Azerbaijan, which is a Muslim country. So I felt that the script was eventually watered down. Quite a lot of the, again, there were very ugly scenes that were removed, and I was disappointed with the film. Things in it that I like, but on the whole, I was very disappointed with it, and I hadn't managed to extract the flavour of the book, I don't think.
And I'm curious, what led you to direct Carrington? Because as far as I know, you never wanted to be a director yourself. It was not in your agenda. So what happened?
Well, we spent all this time trying to raise the money, and eventually Mike Newell, the English director, was a friend of mine, and I had done a film with him, and we decided that he should be the director. And I started working with him, and he cast Jonathan Pryce, and we were arguing, we were disputing about who should play Carrington. And at that point, he had a new film, and people were very pessimistic about the film, and he was extremely pessimistic about it. And one day he called me up and he said, this film is a disaster, and I can't make another little English film. I have to go to America and make it now and make a film in Hollywood, because otherwise, if I make, I'm sorry. I said, well, we've got all the money. I've taken all these years and we've got all the money. He said, I'm sorry, I'm going. So he went off to make a film with Gregory Peck, and the film that he had made in England, the film that everyone was so unhappy about, was 4 Weddings and a Funeral, which was probably by some margin the most successful film that he ever made. But he'd gone, and so we were stuck. And Philippe Carcassonne, who was one of the French producers, there were 3 French producers on Carrington, called me up and he said, well, we've got a start date, we've got the actors, you can now cast Emma Thompson, who you wanted to cast. Why don't you direct it? I said, oh no, I never. Yeah. He said, go on, you direct it. So I said, well, let me think about it. So then I rang Emma. I said, I'm sorry, I have this news to tell you, but Mike is gone, and I would like you to be in the film. And they want me to direct it, but I don't know whether. She said, great, direct it. And I said, but I've never done it before. She said, well, so what? And she said, go on, get on with it, And I had to go for some reason to Los Angeles a couple of days later, and I was thinking, should I direct this film? Should I not direct this film? I went into a bookshop and I bought a book called First Steps in Directing, which is precisely the kind of book I was criticizing in terms of writing, but it was useful. And then I had a friend, a young American director whose career fizzled out, but he was very talented, called Phil Joannou, who was a very nice guy. And I said to him, I've been asked to direct this film. And he said, look, I come around to your hotel in 2 days. I'll tell you everything you need to know about directing. So he came round, he told me everything that I needed to know about directing. I had the book. So I said, okay, I'll direct it. Then I had the most wonderful time. I really, really enjoyed it. It was a marvelous summer in England. The weather was great. The actors were nice. Everything was delightful. And so I then found myself on a panel with Stephen Frears and some other people. And somebody said to me, "You've just directed your first film. What did you?" I said, "Oh, it's marvelous. It's not like writing is so painful and difficult. And here you have all these marvelous people who say, 'Why did you do this and why did you do that?' And the cameraman, would say, everybody is there to help you, and everybody does exactly what you want as soon as you decide what you want. And it's marvelous." I said it was absolutely. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And there was a pause, and he said, "That's because you're not a director." So I don't know. Anyway, the 3 films that I made, I really enjoyed making, but I'm not. I wouldn't mind making another one, but I'm not holding my breath.
Thank you, Christopher. I'm afraid we are running out of time. It's a pity because you have a lot to share with the student, but you can. Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oui, une dernière question.
Ok, une dernière question.
Pourquoi pas?
Good evening, sir. I want to focus about something. The character of John Malkovich.
Yes.
That is strong. Of Glenn Close.
Yes.
And quickly, we see that's not completely true. In fact, not at all. But in fact, I think that he is doing what he is doing, maybe because he believes in what seems good to him. But I don't say that's fair.
Well,
But
I think this really. It's Liaison Dangereuse is a story about professionals. It's about people who have so much money and so much power that they have to focus on something, and what they focus on is seduction. And they're 2 remarkable people, the Valmont and the Marquise de Merteuil. Well, the thing about the Marquise de Merteuil is she's a character unprecedented in literature. She's the first time, from my knowledge, in literature, that a woman that strong is at the center of a story and dictates everything and is ruthless, and therefore she really is the center, not Valmont. Valmont is more active, but the real center of the story is the Marquise de Merteuil, and that's what I think attracted me to the story when I first read it. That it was a story about a woman who, in the circumstances of the 18th century, had very few cards to play, and played them so brilliantly. But however, playing them so brilliantly eventually required her to destroy the one man she really sort of loved, and so the rest of her life is ashes. I think that you had 2 actors who gave remarkable performances. John Malkovich, who wasn't that well known at the time, was extraordinary in Dangerous Liaison, and I mean he's in the film because of me, because I had an instinct about him, and I went to. He was appearing in a play on Broadway, and I was in New York. I went to see the play, and I had the script with me, and I waited at the stage door. I never met him before, and I gave him the script when he came out of the stage door. I said, "I want you to be in this film." And first of all, he was a bit, horrified, but then he took the script. And then he called me the next day and said he would do it. And for me, that solved the problem of the film, which was to find someone who was, at the same time, evil, who behaved in certain evil ways, but somewhere down in there was a sort of core of humanity. which gradually becomes revealed as the story goes on. So, you know, my luck is to have come across the novel by Laclos when I was 19 and fallen in love with it. I think that was the most important part of the whole process. But we can talk more about the characters. But the characters, those are the characters. Those are the characters as I see them.
Okay, but I do my best to make it quick.
Vous pouvez parler en français si c'est.
Parler français?
Oui, un peu.
Autant pour moi. Je sais.
He studied French, I said it.
Alors, si j'ai bien compris, vous parlez surtout pour les liaisons dangereuses d'aristocratie au XVIIIe siècle, surtout en Europe.
Oui.
Et des jeux de pouvoir qui se passent au lieu entre les êtres humains. En fait. Et du coup, pour synthétiser, ça parle d'intelligence, de force et de faiblesse. Et ma question, pour terminer, c'est est-ce que vous pensez il existe une meilleure manière de vivre, comme on peut le voir avec Antonio Banderas?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I think the circumstances of the society in 18th century France imposed that kind of behavior. And so not everyone, of course, Madame de Tourvel does not behave like that, but this was one strategy for working with the problems of society at the time. In the case of Argentina under the fascist dictatorship, it's a different, because Liaison Dangereuse is about the people who are in power. Imagining Argentina is about the people who have no power, who are oppressed by the government. So, of course, this affects people's characters, and different kinds of characters emerge. And you're right that Antonio Banderas is, as far as possible, a good man. And those are very, very difficult to write, by the way. Whereas nobody could say that Valmont or Merteuil are good people. But they do have a kind of, there's something in there, the way they engage with each other and with society that's interesting. And of course, what Liaison says is that as long as you have 1% of the people who own 95% of everything, bad behavior will occur. It so happens that audiences like watching bad behavior, but it's nevertheless not something we should necessarily approve of.
Sorry,
Thank you.
we are really running out of time. If you have further questions, maybe you can approach after.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give a warm thank you to Christopher Hampton.